Serious, what is the most unexplainable thing you've ever witnessed? My friends and I had just been to a few nightclubs last year and we were walking home past a shop. It was about 5 a.m. and the sun was coming up. By the shop we could see a man sitting against the wall with what looked like a white bag of chips. We threw nothing off it and kept walking. Then suddenly the bag of chips started moving and started flying away. It turns out this super drunk guy was just sitting there casually stroking a seagull. How he done that I will never know. After my cat of 10 years died in December, I would hear him meowing. Usually I could just pass it off as thinking too much about him. We used to have a thing where we'd talk back and forth to each other. He'd meow and I'd call back, "Clyde." He'd call again. I'd say, "Clyde." Then he'd run up to me and we'd cuddle. One day I walked outside and I heard him, as if he were sitting 10 feet away. Following right after, I heard my own voice calling from far off, "Clyde." The meow in my voice repeated a few more times. It was extremely nerve-wracking. When it stopped I just turned around and went back inside. I don't hear him meowing much anymore. I was sitting in the room nearest the backyard, on my laptop, heard a knock on the sliding glass door, and looked up to see who was there. I saw a very long hand pull away. The fingers must have been about a foot long, dark purplish gray in color. I got up from the couch, and saw a short figure running away. It disappeared before my eyes. One day my parents decide to trace the family name. We visit a village we knew ancestors came from. While visiting the graveyard we find one. Nobody is around 1 second, the next this old man appears. Apparently he is related to. Tells us we should come for a cup of tea at his house. Gives us directions and name of place. Why Dad asks if the local manor house is still open to the public. He said yes, has been since he remembers. All of the directions he gives us used landmarks that haven't existed for decades. The manor house is private, has been for years. Owner told us he has no idea where his dude's house is. Ghost or random senile ninja? When I was in high school, my grandmother succumbed to cancer. At the funeral, my cousin and aunt sang "Temporary Home" by Carrie Underwood. It was my first time hearing the song, because I never really enjoyed country music. Well, that night I was sitting around a campfire with my brother and best friend when my girlfriend called to tell me she had arrived. Her first words to me were, "Why is your ringback tone Temporary Home by Carrie Underwood?" I had her repeat it again and then just hung up the phone. My ringback tone at the time was "No Sleep" by Wiz Khalifa, which I had not changed for months. I do not really believe in the supernatural, nor do I wholeheartedly believe in coincidence. It has been something I could never explain. When I was a kid, my grandmother gave me a music box that played a sweet melody. The thing was ancient so I didn't play it very often, but I remembered the tune clearly. Many years later at her funeral when it was my turn to say my goodbyes, the music the funeral home was playing on the loudspeaker turned to a classical version of that very song. It was like she was saying goodbye to me, too. I had an uncle pass away about 10 years ago. The weekend after he died I needed to get away from my house for a bit and went to go visit a friend going to college in a town that was about an hour away. On the way there I had a CD playing. When I got close to the town my CD suddenly stopped playing mid-song and defaulted to the radio. The song on the radio was "Drift Away," the original, Not That Blasphemy by Kid Rock, and it was the song that always reminded me of my uncle. A couple seconds after it started playing I came up to an intersection where the light suddenly turned red. I sat there at the intersection and looked up at the street name. It was Allen Street. My uncle who died was named Allen. A couple of years ago I was listening to music on my iPod in my bedroom. I got up to use the toilet and left the iPod on my bed. I returned to my room a couple of minutes later to find my iPod gone. I searched my entire room for it and couldn't find it anywhere. I went down to the kitchen, which is at the other side of the house, to find my iPod standing perfectly upright in the center of the kitchen table. No clue how it got there or even how it was standing up. It was the second-gen iPod Touch. Nobody had been home, all the doors were locked and I hadn't gone to the kitchen before that. To this day it still amazes me how the hell it got there. The house I grew up in was built by my great-grandmother, who died in the house. No one in my family, including me, really believes in ghosts, but this one had us scratching our heads. When I was about 8, my mom randomly lost her wedding ring. She had no memory of taking it off, but lo and behold, it was just gone. I remember searching for it with her for months. After a while, she just sort of gave up and figured it was gone forever. A year later, I brought up the missing ring again and jokingly said, "What if great-grandma took it?" My mom then looked up to the sky and half kidding said, "You better give it back." About an hour later, my dad comes home from work and says, "Look what I found in the driveway." Boom, wedding ring. Strangest thing that has ever happened in my lifetime. When I was in college we rented an apartment that was built in the 1700s. Salem, MA. For the record, I don't believe in ghosts at all, but I can't explain how this, or a few other things that took place there occurred. The apartment had one bathroom that had two entrances, one off the hall stairs and one off my bedroom. One night we were having a small party with maybe 10 to 15 guests. Someone went up to use the bathroom and came back saying it was locked and there was no response to knocking. We all looked around and no one was missing. Curious, I went up and started pounding on the hall door. Nothing. I went around through my room and that entrance was also locked and further knocking produced nothing but silence. Starting to freak out a little, my roommates and I had a quick discussion and decided to kick down the door. Being an old house, it wasn't that hard and we poured into the bathroom expecting to find someone passed out, but it was completely empty. Locked from the inside, with two deadbolts. The one window had long been painted shut. The hair on my arms is standing straight up right now typing this as it was then. How do not one, but two, slide deadbolts lock themselves from inside an empty room? A ton of other bizarre things happened there and we finally moved after a mysterious fire that the fire marshals were completely unable to determine a cause. A few years ago I was on a road trip driving from Florida to Kentucky. We were driving straight through, so it was around 3 a.m. and we were getting close to Atlanta. There was a group of 4 box trucks in one van. You could tell that these 5 vehicles were traveling together. Driving them were these 5 skeezy-looking men. What caught our attention first was the fact that they were all driving pretty erratically, swerving and hard correcting themselves, constantly tapping their brakes, etc. What was weird was that the box trucks wouldn't let anyone on either side or directly in front of the van. This ended up making it pretty difficult to pass them, plus it's 3 a.m. and we're just trying to stay awake, so this was relatively entertaining. So we kept pace with them for a while. The weirdest part to me was their braking. It was like all 5 of them had Parkinson's and didn't realize their foot was hovering over the brake. It was a light show. They knew when cops were going to be on the side of the road and they would slow way down below the speed limit when passing them. Eventually, their crazy driving started getting a little too dangerous. We knew what was up. By this point, we had been driving near them for at least an hour or so, but the closer we got to Atlanta the more cars were on the road and they almost ran a few off the road. So, I called the cops. Since we were on the interstate they had to keep switching us to the next county over every few minutes. While I was on the phone with them though, one of the drivers saw me on the phone and looking in their direction. It was almost as if he knew what I was doing. I was legitimately scared at that moment. This crazy is going to drive us off the road for breaking up their sketchy box truck motor pool and this is how I die. No cops ever came. We averted their crazy driving. We never saw what was in that van. And they all 5 got off at the same exit in the middle of nowhere. I definitely wish I would have followed them solely out of curiosity. It may not seem that sketchy to you, but it was weird in real life. I'm pretty sure my house has a friendly ghost in it. When we first moved in, the chimney would randomly blow in soot when there was no fire or wind. We got an infestation of bugs that no one could identify, and other assorted weird crap. Now it's mostly settled down, but lights will occasionally shut off after I've left a room. My dog will bark at air, doors I left open will be closed and vice versa. I think they're just living peacefully alongside us, sharing the house. I considered them invisible friends. Me and my little brother were home alone playing Super Smash and we heard my little sister say, "Hey, we're over here," from the closet, but we were fucking home alone. We went and checked it out and yup, we were still alone. Still freaks us out and we have no explanation. Very shortly after breaking up with my then girlfriend, I attended by myself a college basketball game at a major D1 university because I was feeling a bit bummed out and wanted to get my mind off things. I told exactly 0 people I would be attending this game, because I decided to do it on a whim. The opponent was not very good, so there were many empty seats. I decided to sit in the upper deck in an arena that holds nearly 16,000 people. There were at most 20 other people in the upper deck, and plenty of open seats in the lower bowl. As the game is starting, a random man approaches me and says, "You're in my seat." Okay, that's weird. I'm literally the only person in this section and there are thousands of empty seats up here, but whatever buddy, have your seat. As I'm getting up to choose some other random seat to sit in, the PA announcer comes on and says that a car in the parking lot has left its lights on. It's my car. This is pretty strange. This is not some rinky-dink high school basketball game. This is a game in front of several thousand people at a very large, prominent school. In the many hundreds of games I have attended here, never have I heard the PA announcer come on to tell someone they left their lights on. So I walk out to my car and my lights are not on. Maybe the battery died? Nope, starts right up. As I'm getting out of my car, I get a text from a phone number that I do not know that says, "I'm watching you." The zookeeper. Why did that guy ask me to move from that seat? There was no way he bought the ticket. There were infinitely many better seats available. Why did the PA announcer come on at the exact moment the guy approached me? Who told them my lights were on when they weren't? Who is the zookeeper? What the hell is going on here? I broke physics once in college. We were doing a liquid-liquid separation in a huge car column. Okay, it's just a really tall tube, with two outlet ports at the top, on top of each other. We pumped too much water into the column and it started spewing out of one of the outlets like you'd expect. Except the water was coming out of the top hole, not the bottom one, so we had water going up a tube, passing right by an open hole, going an additional 5 cm or so, then shooting out the other hole. We had no idea what was happening and just started at it while it flooded the room. Couldn't repeat it again. Damnedest thing, nerdy as hell, but there you go. My deceased friend claimed his house was on an Indian burial ground and was haunted. I stayed over one night. We all, 3 of us and the dog, slept in the living room and nobody nor nothing, nor no more animals were in the house. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone loudly running up and down the basement stairs. I look over and my 2 friends are passed out. I look for the dog and it's right beside my friend looking terrified as shit. I was convinced his house is haunted after that. I've posted this before, but it's relevant enough to post again. Back in high school I was always going to concerts. I was at a Metallica concert and went out to smoke a cigarette and these 2 guys my age walked up to me and said they knew me, that we went to the same school, and then proceeded to rattle off the last 6 or 7 concerts I had gone to, saying that they had seen me at them. I had never seen these guys before. Ever. But they knew my name, first and last. Next day I walk into school and these 2 guys are sitting in the hall across from the door. I said hi as I walked by and the bell rang, and they just sat there. Went to class and never saw either one of them ever again. I asked around if anyone knew these 2 and everyone said no, they weren't in the yearbook either. I was driving home from work one night at around 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning. I live on a peninsula, so there is only one main road. It's kind of a typical suburban area with small stores and churches. As I'm coming up on the Baptist church I see something odd over the steeple. It was a very large airship with a light on top that blinked red, green and blue. The light was flashing at irregular intervals, and was probably about 100 feet above the church. It was long with vents protruding off the side where spotlights illuminated the grass below. The airship made no discernible sound. I slowed my car to a dead stop staring at this thing. I immediately thought to take a picture, but my shitty BlackBerry only had like a 5MP camera and no flash. I had a nice DSLR in the trunk so I got out of my car to get it, still stopped in the middle of the road, but as soon as I opened my car door the thing flew off with incredible speed. I jumped back into my car and did a U-turn to follow it, but it vanished into the night sky. I have no explanation to what it was. It didn't have wings like a plane, it wasn't a helicopter, it wasn't a blimp. The only logical conclusion I could draw was that I hallucinated the thing. I had not been drinking and I don't do drugs and I haven't had any hallucinations before/after this. This isn't even a case of me seeing something weird in the night sky and trying to figure out what it was. This thing was right in front of me, barely 200 feet in the air. Massive and in my face. I spent weeks after my sighting Googling UFO, my area, in as many iterations as I could think of, but never found anyone else who saw it. When I was about 17, I was at my friend's apartment building, which his parents owned. We had an apartment to hang out in on the top floor and used to go to the roof to smoke. One night, we were about to go up, but I had to pee, so I told him I'd meet him up there. After I was done, I went up the stairs to the attic portion that was connected to the roof. There were no lights, so we always used our phones to guide us. It was an old building and the attic was creepy and cluttered all the time. As I made my way to the roof door, I saw a shadow pass by me. I followed the direction it went thinking it was my friend. I kept saying that I knew it was him and to stop playing around. It passed me a few more times, when I heard my friend's voice from downstairs. He got a call from his girlfriend and was in another room talking to her the whole time. I have no idea what that shadow figure was, but it really freaked me out. I told my friend what happened and that I did not want to go back up there. He believed me and instead of us going to the roof, we went for a walk. I was house sitting for my aunt and uncle about 8 years ago, and their house is in a big subdivision, but at the time it was one of the only houses in the new phase, so it was a good mile from the other parts of the development. Anyway, it was a typical newish home, 3 bedrooms, garage, screened-in pool in the back, skylights, etc. I slept on the pull-out couch in the living room so I could watch the big TV while I was going to bed. Anyway, on the second night I hear this thudding sound coming from what sounded like the garage, so I went in to check it out and make sure nothing had fallen over or anything. Anyway, I didn't find anything. I go back down and eventually fall asleep. I wake up to a silver polish infomercial like 2 hours later, and I roll over to grab the remote, and as I roll over I glance up at the skylight that's right above me and I see this outline of a figure staring down at me, and like 2 seconds later panic sets in. I run into my aunt and uncle's bedroom, grab his gun from the top of his closet, and call the police. Around 10 minutes, seemed like hours, later the police arrive and find my uncle's ladder set up on the side of the house, but no signs of whoever was on the roof. Not really paranormal or anything, but we never found out who was up there or why. One night in our previous house, I wake up to a small sound outside our ground floor bedroom window. I cautiously peek out and there is somebody squatting on the ground beneath the window looking up. I gasp and pull back, and without turning on any lights I wake my husband and tell him there is somebody outside. We both creep to the window and look again, and a man's face is looking up at us from just below the windowsill. I have never forgotten that nightmarish jolt I felt. My husband goes bolting outside to confront the stranger, but he was gone. It's not really an unexplainable event, because it was probably either a potential burglar or a peeping Tom, but it was really creepy. The first one was a nice experience. I had my room down in the basement, and was walking up the steps. No one else was in the house and I slipped and started to fall backwards. There was no rail, so nothing I could hang on to. The thought crossed my mind that I would be dead if I hit the floor, concrete, because it might be hours before someone got home. All of a sudden, I feel, very clearly, a hand on the small of my back. It shoves me up. I turn around. Nothing. I thank them and hurry up the stairs. I'm not going to be rude to whoever/whatever that was. The second experience was not so nice. I was sleeping and I woke up. Important, I've never suffered sleep paralysis. Ever. I was not experiencing it when I woke up. I had not watched any scary movies, read anything scary. It wasn't close to Halloween. There was no reasoning for what happened. Again, I was fully in control. I roll over to get comfortable and there's something in my closet. It looked a lot like shadows and oil put together. No face, no limbs or hands, just 2 small pinpricks. And I had the sudden realization that if I called for anyone or got out of bed, it would be able to leave the closet and suck my soul out of me. I was sure of this fact. So I did the only thing I could think of to do. I closed my eyes and prayed for God to send angels down to protect me. I immediately felt a sense of peace and fell back asleep within seconds. I take a very long time to fall asleep. 30 minutes is my shortest length. It's usually closer to an hour. Needless to say, we soon moved out of that house. My parents experienced some things too, I think. Edit. A lot of people are saying my second experience is most definitely sleep paralysis. I was hesitant to call it that, because I was under the impression that it was impossible to wake up normally, feel like you could move, and then fall into a state of paralysis. Also, I was able to move in bed, I just didn't want to get out of bed. At the time that this happened though, I was pretty young though, and it was unexplainable to me. It's still pretty terrifying to this day. While I'm happy to take the scientific explanation, a small part of me can't help but think, if a monster had wanted to get to me that night, wouldn't mimicking sleep paralysis be the best way to go about it? A couple of years ago I flew to visit/stay with my husband, then fiancé's family for the first time. We had never met, never spoken, and I didn't know much about them. The first few weeks I was there I kept to myself and just cleaned up the house a bit while my husband and his mom were working. Since I'd first arrived I'd had a song stuck in my head, Baby Mine from the movie Dumbo, and my sister-in-law kept catching me singing it while cleaning up around the house and repeatedly asked why I was singing it. I told her I didn't know why it was stuck in my head, but it had been since I got there and it was driving me crazy. My husband eventually took me to visit his baby brother's grave. We cleaned up the grave and rearranged some flowers. I saw a guy who looked pretty much exactly like me. I saw him as he was getting off the bus and I was sitting on the seat by the window. We both stared at each other. I did longer cause I noticed the similarity first, for about 10 seconds. It was one of the most frightening experiences ever. For a second I thought I might be going insane or hallucinating. And for the ride back I felt so many feelings, like wanting to have met him and then being afraid of actually meeting him. Wanting to know everything about him. Almost as if asking another person what it is for them to be you. I never saw this person again, and in a way I don't want to, cause I feel like the earth might crack and swallow me, but it was just eerie. One time when I was about 15 I was sitting outside of my house relaxing in a chair and I noticed my mom come outside of our guest house. She walked towards me and turned around along with a gesture of "oh I forgot," and went back inside the house. A couple minutes later I go inside the main house and go inside my room. My mom is lying on my bed and sound asleep. My room had black outlines so she often napped there if her headache was bad enough. I woke her and she said she had been there for a while. I like to believe my mind just had a crazy hiccup and I imagined the whole thing. Just to clarify, it was broad daylight and nothing seemed odd about my mom when I saw her. And I even called out to her but she didn't seem to hear me. When I was a teenager, my house used to occasionally do weird things. It has since stopped, but every once in a while it would act up. The most unusual thing that occurred happened when my mom and I were standing in the kitchen. The door to my room was open nearby, but nobody was inside. While we were talking, all of a sudden a piece of jewelry came flying out of my room and skirted along the floor. To this day we have no idea how that happened. Ironically, neither one of us was freaked out about it. The place I worked at was next to a graveyard and we had a customer that told us all the time our store was haunted. I usually just kinda enlightened the customer with a conversation but ignored her comments about it. Well, one day she came in and told me, "Child, I need you to be careful. Whatever is here does not like you. I don't want you hurt, so I made this for you to protect you," and hand me a silver necklace. It was a silver necklace with a real human tooth in the pendant. I loved it. Wore it all the time, never took it off. Fast forward a few months. I'm staying in a hotel because my apartment needed repair and I couldn't stay during construction. First night at that hotel I took of my jewelry to sleep and I woke up to a banging in my room. Little weirded out, but I went back to sleep. Later I felt someone grabbing my neck and I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. A couple hours of watching TV and I hear a really loud boom above me. It looked like someone punched a hole in the wall. After that I put the necklace back on and never had a problem again. 4th of July, 2014, Portland, Oregon. My friends and I were sitting outside, watching fireworks, drinking beer, smoking weed. We noticed two orange, bright orbs floating in the sky. We immediately thought UFOs. I went home, Googled UFO 4th of July Portland. Didn't find anything from that night, but found claims of seeing UFOs on the 4th the year before. The next day, at Portland Blues Fest with most of the same friends, a little boy, maybe 9 or 10, approaches me. He appeared to be all by himself. He says, "Can I tell you something?" I say yes. He continues, "Last night I was with my uncle while he was working. He watches security cameras for a bank. He was showing me how the thermal camera works, and we saw 3 bald men walking down the sidewalk, not emitting any body heat. And then he walks off." One time my brother bought a Minecraft miniature from Walmart. He showed it to me when I was at his place. He said it was $5 but it was teeny and kind of a rip-off, so he wouldn't have considered buying more. Next time I go there I was using his bathroom and come out and see the little zombie dude on the floor, not in the room with the display shelf, so I pick it up and bring it to him. He goes to put it back and discovers his is already there and a new one has materialized in his apartment. He says it's me trying to mess with him, but why would I spend $5 on a miniature not worth $5 just to trick him? Come on. So I had just gotten out of work, around 1 a.m., and I was heading to the store for some late-night snacks. As I was backing out of my driveway, I looked up and noticed several lights hovering about 500 feet above. They were orange, bright, and seemed to be a part of the same mass, meaning these lights did not move independent of one another. In the darkness of the night, I could just make out the shape they were connected to. Round, and dark, kind of like a quadricopter. My immediate thought was that it was a drone, as it was not moving like a plane would, and there was no sound as there would be with a helicopter. However, after staring at it for a couple of seconds, I figured it was much too large to be a personal drone. If it was at ground level, I'd estimate it to be at least 20 feet in diameter. As I was staring at it, I was continuing to back out of my driveway and onto the street. As I pulled out, the thought occurred to grab my cell and photograph it, but by that point, it had slowly moved out of sight behind the tree line. At this point, I was beginning to question myself. I knew I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't under the influence of any drugs or alcohol. I had definitely seen something. But, whatever, I couldn't see it anymore, and I was on my way to get some food, so I decided to just kind of forget about it. As I made my way to the store, I came to an intersection by my old middle school which was in the general direction of where I saw the UFO before. As soon as I pulled up, I saw it again, this time much closer. From here, the lights surrounding the craft were much brighter, and it was hovering ever so slowly above my old school and the neighborhood to its left. The craft itself was dark, very dark, so much so that it stood out against the night sky behind it. I could also tell it was quite large and rounded. The closest thing I can compare it to would be this UFO from GTA 5 but with orange lights surrounding it. Upon seeing it again, I was completely dumbfounded, and I stared at it until it moved out of sight once again. That's pretty much the main gist of the story. I haven't seen anything like it since. After it disappeared again, I went to the store and got my snack on, still confused about what I saw. While I'm not gonna say it was surely aliens, it was definitely unlike anything I'd ever seen in real life before. One evening my mother and I were trying to get our stubborn dog to go out into the backyard. She didn't want to go at all. As we were trying to convince her it was a good idea, I heard a loud clap right next to my ear. I asked Mom, "Why did you do that so close to my face?" She replied, "I didn't clap, I thought you did." I was on the board of directors for a local non-profit business group, and we were having our monthly board meeting. I had been on the board for many years and knew everyone pretty well, especially the guy sitting next to me. He is a very, very successful businessman in a major city. He's high profile, does lots of TV advertising where he is the on-air talent, a serious dude. At the beginning of each meeting, we all take out our phones and switch them to silent or off, cause anyone whose phone rings audibly gets a fine. Most phones are set down on the table so if a call does come, we can glance at it and excuse ourselves and answer it if it's an emergency, or push the ignore button to stop it from vibrating. 20 minutes into the meeting, this guy's phone rings, and he just stares at it as the blood drains from his face. We all look at him and instead of excusing himself or hitting ignore, he answers it. He says hello a couple of times, someone says something to him on the phone, and he quickly hangs up. We all stare at him again, waiting for his explanation for the interruption of our meeting. He says the caller ID was from his dead uncle, a guy who had passed years and years ago. When he answered, he could hear his uncle's voice, but he couldn't understand what his dead uncle was trying to say. The combination of both things caused him to just hang up. I called bullshit on him, and he handed me his phone, showing me the caller ID. It's his dead uncle's name. It's possible that someone else was assigned his dead uncle's number and that person might have sounded like the dead uncle on the phone, but his reaction sure made it seem like it was a legit creepy moment. I asked this guy months later if it had happened again. He said no, and if it was a put-on, and he insisted it wasn't. He's a pretty straight arrow, so it seems real to me. He also bought a new phone, with a new number. Kind of late, but when I was younger, 15, I was home alone with my brother 19. I was just sitting on the couch at somewhere around 11 p.m. and all the lights were off and I saw what I thought was him because it was his height was just looking at me. I took my socks off and balled them up and threw them at him. Only it wasn't my brother. What I saw ran away like a dog would in cartoons. After about 20 minutes of almost shitting myself, I mustered up the courage to go to my brother's room. He wasn't home. I was home alone the entire time. It could not have been an animal because I lived on the 4th floor of an apartment building with no animals allowed to live there. We were sorting some boxes in the living room of my old house before moving out. We had brought our new puppy who was very docile and a bit clingy. She was at my feet the entire time we were there. So, it was just me, my mom, my brother, and the puppy sitting in a circle going through boxes, and no one got up during this time. We were only there about 30 minutes. As we were finishing up and getting ready to leave, I noticed the dog was missing. The house was a basic ranch layout, open living room and kitchen, dining room, long hallway with 2 bedrooms and a master and a bathroom, so she couldn't have gone far. We searched the entire house for the dog and could not find her. We searched every room at least 3 times and all 3 of us were calling for her. There was no barking, whimpering, scratching, nothing. On our 3rd round in the master, my brother just desperately opened up the walk-in closet and out comes my dog, shaking and with her ears down. We left quickly after that because the door opens out into the room. Someone would have had to have coaxed the dog into the empty closet and then closed the door behind her or pulled it closed from the inside. There were no vents near the door and the heating and air had been shut off for months. Strange things occurred in that house while we lived there and intensified as we were moving out, so I don't know really what to chalk it up to. I've been to summer camps for language in England a couple of summers, and the first one was a Bell school. It was a giant mansion with a big land. Some nights we would sleep in the gardens in tents for the fun of it, but since I was in the young group, the teachers would wake us up and walk us to the toilets inside the building so, we wouldn't piss ourselves. During a walk to the toilet in the dead of the night, I somehow turned a corridor without anyone noticing. I wasn't bothered at all because I followed another boy who seemed to know where he was going. He led me back outside and ran away once he heard a teacher call my name. No one believed me when I told them about that other boy, and my English was only 4 to 5 words, so I cried in frustration for a day. My house was haunted as a child, which is weird to say, because I'm not even sure I believe in ghosts, but man, it was like a horror film back then. Beds shaking, being strangled by invisible forces, cold spots, animals acting strange, footsteps with no cause, faces in the windows, feet being tickled, appliances switching themselves off and on, PowerPoints that leaked green goo. It was crazy. I'm not even sure I believe it, but heaps and heaps of people witnessed things. People who hadn't even been told about them. I had a strange encounter once. I was at my father's place in West Virginia, out in the middle of nowhere. They called it the Holler. Well, I was trying to sleep on the 2nd floor. The bed was about 10 feet from the end of a staircase right at the front door. I had this reoccurring invasive image pop into my head that someone was going to break the door open and charge up the stairs with an axe. That image played through my head a couple dozen times before I managed to fall asleep. I mentioned this the next day and my father told me that no one sleeps upstairs anymore because of things like that. They are pretty sure it's haunted. Once I was in the kitchen of my old apartment and a really bright golden yellow light flashed across the fridge for a second. It couldn't have been car headlights or a reflection because the window shades were drawn and the apartment did not face any roads anyway. Another time I was in my bedroom and saw a shadow that looked like a man's profile wearing a top hat. I got out of bed and went to the area the shadow was in and shuffled a bunch of stuff, clothes, objects, around, but the shape of the shadow didn't change. One time, I saw a flying object, UFO, over a hill while I was shopping with my family. I was 7 years old at the time, so I don't know what it exactly looks like, but it was a large black disc in the middle of broad daylight. Then, it made a weird, eerie sound. I asked my brother to look at the object, but as soon as I turned back to it, it disappeared. The weird thing is that nobody else noticed it. More than a few years ago, I was a high school stoner hanging out with my high school stoner friends. We lived in a rural suburb kind of area, so everybody's house was surrounded by woods. Our weekend ritual was to stay at a friend's place overnight, then walk into the woods to smoke once their parents were asleep. It was business as usual that night. We sat in a pile of leaves, passing around a ghetto-rigged smoking apparatus. One of us would take a hit while the other repurposed their flip phone into a flashlight, so that we could see the piece. The rotation got to me, so I took the piece and lit it, filling my lungs with smoke. About halfway through the hit, I hear, quite loudly, "Red Robin, yum." Taken off guard, I fell prey to a fit of coughing. The tune abruptly ceased after that single iteration, but I swear, It was like somebody had literally pulled out a TV into the middle of the woods, cranked the volume, and the Red Robin commercial came on. The audio was exactly that of the Red Robin theme. I exchanged glances with my friends, looking for any indication that they had heard it. They all just looked kind of high and confused. Classic high school stoners. I decide that I must have been high and had an auditory hallucination. After all, there was a half-mile of woods in every direction, and it was like 1 a.m. I resumed my hit. Right as I started to inhale, my friend to my left said, "I could have sworn I'd just heard the Red Robin jingle." Another coughing spasm took hold of me. Everybody started freaking out as we all realized that everybody else had heard it as well. We continued getting baked, and ended up arguing about whether or not to go to Red Robin. We eventually made cinnamon rolls and passed out. I've mentioned it to them since, and everybody remembers it, though none of us can explain it. Either the whole ordeal was a paranormal experience, or a really clever marketing campaign to stoners. I once saw a guy overdose. I was 9, eating pizza when a car crashes into a tree put side. The dude driving runs out screaming and gets his friend out. The friend was so white, he was glowing. He was shaking, and looked possessed. When the paramedics came, they barely helped him. The drug seminars at school were crap, but nothing scares you more off drugs than what I saw. I was parked on the side of the street with a co-worker when a kid driving a nice-ass vintage Dodge Charger slammed on his brakes, stopped in the middle of the street, got out and proceeded to put on a puppet show with a dead squirrel he found on the street. It went on for a good 5 minutes while he made it dance and sing show tunes. He only stopped when he looked up and realized we had been watching him the whole time. There was an old analog wall clock in my grandmother's house that stopped at 4:19 a week after my grandfather died in 1997. My grandmother never bothered fixing it. Everyone else largely ignored it since there were only about 1,000 other clocks in her house. My dad decided he was going to fix it one day in March 2012 and got it running again. When my grandma asked, he responded, "Batteries." Yup, my grandmother died June 6, 2012. The clock kept running for the following week. My dad remembers it working when he entered her house on the afternoon of the 13th. He went out for a walk after tending for a few things, but when he got back the clock was stopped. This is where it gets weird. The time, 4:19. That's where it has sat ever since. It's entirely possible this was purely by chance, but still. It weirds me out. I was 22 years old. One day I was in our backyard doing some chores. Out of the corner of my eye I see a group of large black birds in the next yard over. I walk closer to get a better look. One of the birds is perched in a stump and all of the other birds were on the ground looking up at this bird. The bird on the stump was getting very animated. It was making a lot of noise and flapping its wings erratically. It appeared as if it was giving some sort of political speech. I must have made some noise because all of a sudden they all looked over at me and flew away. It was the weirdest thing I have ever seen. Well, one night while walking home I saw what looked like a silhouette with glowing red eyes standing under a street light. I chose to assume I either hallucinated or saw something wrong, but either way I took another street and stopped going out so late. When I was about 14, a guy who was collecting scrap from a junkyard was minding his own business when a homeless man came up, trying to take some scrap from him. The guy collecting it got a metal pipe. It wasn't completely rigid and flexible, but it was a pipe, and he started whipping the homeless man with it. My stepfather called the cops. The homeless man was a bloody mess before the police arrived. A while back me and my friend were trying to sneak into this bar, since we were underage, and we met this guy in front that was super drunk and started talking to us, telling us we were some cool guys and that he would help us get in and buy us some drinks. Suddenly a security guard comes sprinting towards us and starts talking to the drunk guy. I was kinda drunk so I couldn't make out much of what he was saying, but it was something like, "Is that your friend over there?" That the guard said, and pointed to some guy running in circles screaming in the parking lot. Then what confused me is the drunk guy we were talking with got a super serious look on his face and asks, "Is he going for the balls?" And the security guard says with a straight face, "Yes." And they both ran after him and I kinda blacked out after that point. We were doing some set decorating in an old abandoned hospital for a feature film we were shooting. Me and the second AC were walking through the building's upper floors. Most of the hallway emergency exit doors at the end of each hallway were locked, so you had to walk back to the main elevator or stairwell. Although the rooms were open, We were looking for air conditioning units left behind since it was getting really warm. At the end of one of the hallways in the long-term patient care wing we distinctly heard keys jingling on a chain that could have had a million other keys on it. I stopped my friend and asked him if those were his keys, and we both checked our pockets, but had definitely left everything of ours on the main floor of our set. Suddenly we heard a door at the end of the hall swing shut and a loud bang reverberated through the empty corridor. We checked every room, and found nothing, not even air conditioning units. This sounds stupid. Early last year, after my ex and I split up, I was away for work building windmills in southern Alberta. There was a lot of physical aspects of the job, such as climbing the ladder 300 feet a few times a day. The days were long. The pay was good. I worked with a good crew of people. There were roughly 200 windmills being erected and we were in the northern quadrant running last-minute repairs. My partners and I would climb up a section, take a break, then continue to climb. On one of these breaks on the ladder in the middle of the dark, I pulled out my phone. Lo and behold, my phone was on and there was a face on the phone. "WTF?" I exclaim as I watch the photo fade away and my phone turn off in my hand. It was a face clear as day. I turned on the phone to look through my pictures. Maybe I pocket pictures my pockets? Maybe it's a picture of my hand? Maybe it's anything else aside from a face? But there wasn't anything in my pictures. I told my partner, and after a few slight repairs we split back down the tower and sat in the truck outside. We both felt a little creeped out. Now, I'm not one to believe in ghosts or supernatural phenomena. I believe they can be explained, but what the heck is going on in my brain to make me hallucinate a face on my phone to fade away and turn off right before my eyes? Time passed. I forgot about it completely until a few days ago when it happened again. I was reaching to turn off a lamp in my room and I looked at my phone. It was on, with a face on it. It faded out as picked it up. I would like to add that this phone I currently have is a new phone. That old phone is long gone. It happened to me in 2009. I was going to a friend's party, but before that I was watching a movie. I think that it was a Bleach movie. Anyways, in the middle of the movie I saw from the corner of my eye a person standing in front of mine fridge. I thought that it was my brother grabbing something to eat, but then I remembered that there was no one at home but me. I looked back and saw a young girl with brown hair, then I blinked and she disappeared. Lost the party because of that. Glowing orbs about the size of basketballs playfully chasing each other around over a cornfield. We got out of the car to investigate and they went straight up into the sky until we couldn't see them anymore. One night about 3 years ago I was walking along the boardwalk in Ventnor, New Jersey, just south of Atlantic City. I looked out over the ocean and saw 6 circular lights hovering in a line in perfect formation. Then, all of a sudden they flew apart in different directions faster than any man-made object I've ever seen. Still baffles me to this day. My great-aunt passed away from a 10-year battle with cancer. She was very religious, so at her passing was not so traumatic. She accepted it. She absolutely loved cats. She owned several throughout her life. She was never married, and I'm not even sure if she ever had a serious relationship with a man. And she loved red birds. I guess they're robins. Anyway, there were a few unusual instances that happened right after her death. So the first thing is that my 2 cats suddenly started staring at the ceiling all the time. They would walk to a specific part of the ceiling and meow for a little while and then go back to their normal cat lives. This eventually stopped about 2 months after her passing. The second instance kind of coincides with the first event. I took her cat that she owned, but he was so old and sickly I had Mom take him, so they could care for him better. He needed round-the-clock attention. That's when the cats started staring at the ceiling. About a week after I gave the cat to my mom, she saw him staring at the ceiling, then a glass sitting on the counter exploded. My mom instantly started to explain why she took the cat from me, and the cat stopped staring at the ceiling, about the same time that my cat stopped. Then Mom was fussing about some family drama in her bedroom when a glass that was sitting in the bathroom exploded. Mom took it as a sign for her not to worry about the drama and to let it go. My mom is extremely religious, so that is why she was so quick to feel like my great-aunt was speaking to us. Last instance was that we all took a rose from her funeral. One of my cousins knew someone who could turn the petals into jewelry. So we all sent our roses off to her and ordered what jewelry we wanted it to be turned into. Well, she had them sitting on the couch one day when she had the cleaning lady come over. She was out at the time, and when she came back, the roses were gone. She panicked and started tearing her house apart. She did this for about a week, Until one day a red bird landed on her windowsill. At the same time, the thought popped into her head that she should check her trunk. Once she checked 3 times already. When she checked it, the roses were there. Probably all a bunch of coincidences that don't really mean anything, except for those who were trying to feel closer to an important member of the family that left us, but we just can't put a good explanation to it all. When I was about 10, I went downstairs to get a drink and I heard my mom yell from upstairs for me to bring her the tweezers. So, I go into the living room, grab them, and I just have this scared feeling. Walking back to the stairs, I turn around and there's a little girl standing there in a white dress. She smiles at me and I smile back at her and I keep walking to the stairs. When I get to the bottom, I turn around and she's there behind me. As soon as I'm about to ask her what she's doing, my mom asks me if I found them and I turned my head to tell up and say yes. When I turned around, she was gone. When I told my mom about it, she told me to stop lying and go to bed. Still creeps me out thinking about it. I couldn't understand why I felt scared if she seemed so friendly. Halloween night in '09. Was sitting on the couch watching TV with my dad. Next thing you know, I feel like I was sprayed with something. I look down at my arm and see blood droplets. I proceed to get up and look in the mirror. Blood is on my face in tiny droplets. Neither me or my dad knows where that blood came from or how it was sprayed on me. Weirdest Halloween ever. I was working on a job with a crew of about 50 that had to be housed at several locations over the period of 2 weeks. We were filming and it made sense to house the crew in several different places during the period of the shoot as our locations were all over the place. One night I finished at around 1 a.m., and there was a stuff up with the amount of beds in a place or something. Honestly, I can't remember, but I ended up having to drive another hour to where we fortunately still had a house booked for that night. The 3 crew members who were originally there had since moved on to the next location. If you ever want to be a film travel coordinator, as you can tell, it can get pretty confusing. When I arrived at roughly 2 a.m. and walked into the apartment, I immediately sensed something was off. It just set off this vibe. I had to go around the whole house, it was fairly big, and check in all the rooms and wardrobes. I just could not shrug this vibe I got. I can't explain it, but I couldn't ignore it. I set myself up in one of the rooms, but couldn't sleep and ended up moving into the lounge room to sleep on the couch. I had to be up at 6 a.m. the next day, so I thought, even if I don't sleep, I can just rest for a few hours before I need to get up. I kept all the lights on, but I just couldn't shake the vibe. Eventually I got up to go to the toilet, and as I was walking across the lounge room I felt something wet under my feet. I looked down, my socks were soaked and I was standing in a wet patch of carpet. It was about 4 meters in diameter and was a completely perfect circle. I couldn't see anything leaking from the roof or anything. It was just a massive, perfect circle in the middle of a quiet lounge room that wasn't there when I walked to the couch about a half hour before. I picked up all my stuff and left. Sat in McDonald's till I had to start work the next day. I talked to the 3 crew members who stayed there for a few nights before, and they all spoke of the same sort of vibe I got. There were 3 of them in the house and they all slept with their lights on, but none of them noticed any leaking or anything. We started looking the place up afterwards, and turns out it was a converted old monastery that took in orphan boys. Couldn't find any info on any murders or anything, but we all had that distinct vibe that something was wrong. Can't explain it. As a kid, I was swinging on a swing in a park when this teenager asked me if I wanted to see him levitate. He stood beside his 2 friends and levitate. I swear they didn't lift him. It was so weird. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.